Hello there. Welcome to the video lecture on product management and product lifecycle. This lecture is associated with Module 8 and Chapter 9 in the textbook. When talking about product management, essentially it is the systematic coordination of a product's strategy and on a day-to-day basis, the marketing mix. There are many product managers, and I've worked with a lot of them, and this is what they do. They're trying to figure out how to deal with the 4 Ps as well as the strategy. And they're usually dealing with product lines. Very few companies just have one product. They will have a range of products. And usually this range of products is meant to satisfy a range of target markets. Certainly, at the very least, the one target market that they've chosen to serve. And it may include what are called line extensions, and we'll get into that a little bit later. It's what that specifically is. And it's important to note that each product will have a separate SKU number, which stands for stock keeping unit. Some people will call it sales keeping unit. And it is the number associated with the barcode as you see various products on the shelf. Every version of the product has a different SKU code. For instance, the 8-ounce tube of Crest will have a different SKU number than the 12-ounce tube of Crest. If it's a different flavor, anything that varies, it'll have a different SKU number. And that's important for keeping track of orders. If a store orders a certain number of a particular product in a particular size, they want to use the SKU code so there's no misunderstanding about what they're ordering. And this is particularly important as the distribution channel has become more automated. And you're all familiar with barcode scanners and things like that. And that really works in with the SKU code system. When you're a product manager, there's lots of decisions to be made. We talked a little bit about launching new products. Obviously, the style of the product, the design, the materials it's made out of, these are important decisions, as well as what features that you're going to include. Some offerings might be simpler and have fewer features. Others will be more complex and have more features. There is something that we do need to be aware of, and that's something called feature bloat. And this was a term coined, and I can't remember, it was an article in the Harvard Business Review about how certain products have too many features, and it frustrates customers. And I've certainly experienced that. One day when I was bored, I actually counted the numbers of buttons on my TV remote, and there were 52 buttons, and I didn't know what every button did. In fact, some I hadn't a clue, and they had strange symbols that might have been alien in nature. I don't know. They just didn't make sense. Somebody designed it, and I'm sure these buttons did have a problem. I actually had an instance where all of a sudden all my major cable channels were coming in Spanish. I don't know why. Well, actually, I eventually called the cable company, and this person directed me to the TV remote and instructed me to hit the diamond-shaped button. Now, this button had no other designation. It was just the shape of the button, and I pressed the button, and lo and behold, all my channels came back in English. So then, and there were a number of other buttons. There was a square button, a round button, a triangle button. I asked, what are these other buttons for? And she didn't know. Even the person at the cable company didn't know. And that can be a problem. That can be very frustrating. Now, salespeople tend to like having lots of features because it gives them more to sell. However, in this Harvard Business Review article that I read a few years ago, they found that the more features you had, the harder it was to get a second sale. And there is a demand for products that are simpler. I mean, we're in an age where, you know, almost everyone has smartphones. However, there are still demand for flip phones. People, you know, don't want overly complicated devices sometimes. Again, you may call these people laggards, or for whatever reason, they want to keep things simple. So it's something to consider as you're designing a product. Also, there's issues of quality, both the level of quality and how consistent the quality is. Um, it is not, and our instinct is to make high quality products, and that in generally I think is a good instinct. However, the higher the quality, often the higher the cost, and you might outprice the market. Um, in fact, that even happened with Apple. Not that Apple has ever been known for low price products, but when Steve Jobs came up with the Lisa computer, it had very low sales because it was just priced too high. It was for its time, a very high quality computer. I think it was called the Lisa. It just didn't fly because it was too, you know, high priced. And many companies have learned to make different product lines in terms of quality. Lower quality products at a lower price for people who are more price sensitive. The consistency part is also important. You want to be able to trust what you're buying. You buy a product once and you buy it a second time, you should get the same quality. It might be easier to, in this context, talk about restaurants. I remember when I had an office in Manhattan, and there was one restaurant I really liked, but the trouble is the quality always changed. I was never quite sure what I was going to get. I mean, it was never horrible, but you know, if I had a client that I wanted to take out to lunch or to dinner, um, I didn't choose this restaurant because while the general quality was good, it was inconsistent, and that can be a problem. Um, I'll give a couple more examples here. I don't know how many of you are familiar with pianos, and I spoke to someone in the piano industry. And if you are a pianist, you probably will either want to own aspire to own a Steinway. They are sort of the Rolls Royce of pianos. Um, but I spoke to this person and said, well, yes, you can, you know, on a scale from 1 to 10, you can get a 10, but Steinway, at that time anyway, he felt Steinway had a problem in that, yeah, you could get a 10, but you might also get a 6. Whereas if you bought Baldwin, you'd never get a 10, but you'd probably get somewhere between a 7 and a 9. It had tighter quality control. So that could be, an issue. Chevy is not the top brand in the automotive industry. Rolls-Royce is considered one of the top, but however, they are both quite consistent. If you buy a Chevy, you know what you're getting. If you buy a Rolls-Royce, you know what you're getting. So the level is different, but the consistency is very similar. And this has led, the concern about the consistency has led to what's called TQM, or Total Quality Management. And if you ever are involved in statistics or take a course in quality management, you'll hear about the Six Sigma programs. You can get a black belt in Six Sigma or a green belt. That's beyond the scope of this course, but something you might, if you have a chance to take those certification courses, you might want to consider that. It's about consistency and quality, and so there's that. It is important to understand that quality must meet the level of the target market. Now, for instance, a while back, we've all been familiar with that. For instance, there are grade A eggs and there's grade A beef, and I didn't realize that salmon also had grades. The top grade is called sashimi grade salmon. Now, if I'm doing sushi, I would probably want sashimi grade salmon. However, if I'm making a salmon salad and you're chopping it up into a salad, do I really need sashimi grade salad? Some of you may watch a television show called The Prophet. I've watched it a few times, and the gentleman who is the center of the show basically looks at businesses and decides whether to invest in them. And one was a restaurant that was known for soups. And as he investigated this restaurant, small restaurant chain, I discovered that they were using really high quality tomatoes, and these tomatoes look perfect. And he's saying, "Why are you doing this? You're going to chop them up. Why do they need to look perfect? There's nothing, an ugly tomato can taste just as good as a perfect tomato. We're not making salads here. We're making tomato soup here." So, and he, found a vendor that would sell him tomatoes that were, they were ugly tomatoes, but there was nothing wrong with them as a food and as a flavor. So you have to think about that. Do you really need to produce the highest quality? I'm actually dealing with that with a client right now. I can't get into the specifics, but we're talking about how high quality the product needs to be, and how much time. It's a handmade product, so. So what we've done is we've making up a set of products at various quality levels, and we're going to test market them to see can the target market actually really tell the difference, and that's kind of an important thing to do. We're going to do a little market research that way. There are various branding strategies. One is, in terms of brand names, there are family brands, and then there are individual brands. Now, and there are advantages and disadvantages to each. Here we see on the screen the Heinz product line. I am sure you are all familiar with Heinz tomato ketchup, which is on the bottom left, but they also make cocktail sauce, Worcestershire sauce, roasted turkey gravy. I didn't know they made that. And in the other picture, there's a whole bunch of other ones, certainly tartar sauce, American sandwich sauce. I still don't know what that is, but there's apparently a market for it. And we see some others, hot chili sauce and barbecue sauce and some others. Now, the first one, I believe, was the one we know best, and that is the tomato ketchup, Heinz tomato ketchup. And when they decided to make other sauces, they decided to use the same name, Heinz, the family name. I think actually it did come from a family business originally. Heinz is now owned by the Kraft Corporation, but that's a whole other issue. And so when you have a well-known name and you put that name on a new product, that helps elevate that product. People already know the Heinz name. Heinz is generally considered a good quality ketchup. So why wouldn't they make a good quality cocktail sauce or tartar sauce or whatever? The disadvantage is if something goes wrong. Let's say something goes wrong with one of their sauces. Let's say it's the ketchup. Maybe there's a contaminant, or maybe there's a E. coli or something like that. And there has to be a full product recall on the ketchup. Okay, well, that's bad news for the ketchup business, but what about for the tartar sauce and the barbecue sauce? Well, people started saying, well, those Heinz people, they contaminated their ketchup. Could their tartar sauce be contaminated? Could their barbecue sauce be contaminated? Does the good, good feelings of the brand continue? And so you actually have a number of corporations that, for instance, Procter & Gamble, they have a wide range of products. Many of them you're familiar with: Crest toothpaste, Pampers diapers, a whole bunch of others. There is no Procter & Gamble product in that, it's not, branded with the Procter & Gamble name. They all stand alone. So if, God forbid, one of these products has a bad day in some way, it will, it won't contaminate the other brands. So there's, advantages and disadvantages. So these are decisions that have to be made for product management. Oh, also, I forgot, Heinz also makes baked beans. I think they also do pickles. I'm not sure. So here you see, they have different types of baked beans. And that makes sense. It's a very narrow product line there. But if something went wrong with the ketchup, the beans might get hurt too. So that's why other companies, it makes sense with the sauces to use the same name, but maybe for baked beans, they should have used another brand name. But there we go. We also have what's called generic brands. Generics are, they're manufacturing brands just like any other. However, their value proposition is that they're the same for less. You know, for instance, you might go to the store to buy Cheerios, but if you're more price sensitive, you might see something called Oat-O's. The thing about generic brands is they're almost never advertised. There's not a lot of promotion put into them because their value proposition is they are low price, they're low cost. And so this is generic brands are for low cost people who are price sensitive, low cost consumers, or low cost preferring customers. Where many people are most aware of generics is in the pharmaceutical industry. For instance, Tylenol is the brand, the big brand. However, when it went off patent, you could buy generic ibuprofen. Ibuprofen is the chemical name. So you can go to other places and get generic versions of Tylenol. They can't use the Tylenol name, but they can use what was covered by the patent. The quality of a generic brand is never going to be higher than the manufacturer, the branded version of the product. It is a low cost. It might be just as good, but it will never be better because there's no value to it since you're selling at a lower price. You will often see something, and this is often confused with generic brands, private brands, sometimes known as store brands. For instance, you will often, let's say at A&P, you could go in there and buy milk or juice or other products under the brand name of America's Choice. America's Choice is not a manufacturer. It is the brand made up by A&P. It is a lower cost. It's very similar to generics, and people kind of, as I say, confuse these. And some other examples, and this is one that, well, sort of faded away because of the partial demise of Sears. But when Sears was a strong retail brand, they had their own store brands, Craftsman Tools. I didn't know for many years. I use Craftsman Tools. I do a little bit of woodworking. I have a Craftsman circular saw and a Craftsman drill. These, and you can only buy them in Sears until recently. But they didn't manufacture them. They commissioned somebody else to manufacture them, and they put their name on it. The same with Kenmore. People say, "Oh, the Kenmore brand was wonderful." These were brands of washing machines and refrigerators and things like that, similar appliances. And actually, the Kenmore brand was made by Whirlpool, but you could only buy it at a Sears store, so it's a store brand. In many cases, the store brands are, just a lower price alternative. Then we also have what's called licensed brands. Licensed brands are where there is intellectual property involved. And what they are doing is they're licensing out their intellectual property. A great example of this, and there's kind of an interesting story to it, when Walt Disney was making, I believe it was the first feature-length animated film. This was a major undertaking. Before this, they were all short animated films, but he was going to make a feature-length animated film. And he had, this was such a big undertaking that it became financially difficult for him. He was kind of running out of money. And as the story goes, a pencil manufacturer approached Disney and said, "Mr. Disney, you're Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck guy, right? You said, yes, okay. I'd like to put Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck on my pencils. What, you know, how much would it cost for you to allow me to use your cartoon characters on my pencils? And I think he needed $400, which is a lot more than it is today. And he said $400. So Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse saved Bambi. Bambi was the first feature-length cartoon, animated film. So little piece of trivia there. And you see this a lot too. For instance, the Garfield the cat. I think it's Jim Davis was the guy who created Garfield, the cat that eats lasagna and kind of lazy. When somebody makes a comic strip, the creator generally owns half of the copyright or the trademark, and the distribution company owns the other half. And Jim Davis actually decided to buy up the rights back from the distribution company and managed it himself. And you will see Garfield the cat on all sorts of products. You'll see it on, on greeting cards, on backpacks. There's actually Garfield phones. You can even I know in the Pacific Rim, they really like cartoons, particularly in Japan. You can actually buy something called moon cakes and eat moon cakes, and they have Garfield on them. Now, Jim Davis doesn't manufacture any of this stuff. He licenses it out. And so if you have a strong intellectual property, you can become a licensed brand. Disney has worked very hard to do this, Jim Davis, as well as many others. Of course, there are certain risks. Obviously, copyrights can be violated, as is often the case in the Pacific Rim. There is not the respect for, in general, copyright and patents. Certainly not in China, and in the Pacific Rim, it's generally not part of the culture. So there's obviously problems there. But a licensed brand is a way to, it could be your strategy. We also have co-branding. Co-branding is when two brands that are independent, that are strong on their own, actually create a joint offering. For instance, Apple and Nike have come together. I forget the name of it, because it started with when they had the iPod, and I think it's moved over to the iPhone now, where your shoes, if you get the right Nike shoes, they can actually deliver information to an app on the phone about, so how many miles you've gone, and steps and heart rate and that sort of thing. So Apple and Nike, both strong brands, working together. One of the conditions, another example was if you ever go to TGI Fridays, the restaurant chain, you will find Jack Daniel's meals, and they're meals made with the Jack Daniel's whiskey. They're not really alcoholic. It's just used as for flavoring. And that's, again, two strong brands that have decided to develop some synergy and create a new offering. So the Jack Daniel's meals at TGI Fridays. One of the requirements is that the brands cannot be direct competitors. Coke and Pepsi will never co-brand. They might do a public relations thing together, but they're never going to co-brand. It has to be non-competitors. Like Ford had the Eddie Bauer version of the Ford Explorer. Again, Eddie Bauer is a clothing designer. Ford is a automotive manufacturer. They're not competitors, so they can partner. On some other levels, you can see maybe some cross promotions. We saw this at a Super Bowl. I think I think it was the 2020 Super Bowl, where different brands got into each other's commercials. They did this consciously, and I can't remember the specific commercial. I know Fritos and some dishwashing Liquid were in the same commercial. So that is another form of co-branding, I suppose. It's not the creation of a separate product, but again, they kind of work together. One of the big decisions in developing your brand is selecting a name. If you think about your brand name and all the places it will go, you'll go on the product, you'll go on the packaging, on invoices, any advertising, any trade show graphics, perhaps on business cards. Again, it depends if it's an independent brand, product brand, or maybe a family brand like, you know, Kraft or Heinz or something like that. So this could be, so this is an important decision, both in terms of the name you pick and then, of course, the logo you develop for it. I used to work for Merck, and Merck had a problem. They had, over the years, they had added new divisions, and each division had a different logo. It was very inconsistent branding. In fact, I was told there was one instance where a sales rep went in to meet with a clinic, and the receptionist thought that he was a fraud because he had the logo on his business card was not the same as what she had seen somewhere else. What had triggered, strangely enough, they decided to unify everything. The logo actually was kind of, I think it was an old German design. It was a circle with MERCK going vertically and also going horizontally, and they shared the same, the R in the middle. Similar to the Bayer logo, I believe. I think that the Bayer is still using that logo. This was triggered by, they built a new headquarters, and they was going to do a big stained glass window, and the stained glass was going to be their logo. And they actually, wait, before we do this, we're going to spend $100,000 or whatever it is on this stained glass window. Let's make sure we've got the logo right. And I was asked to try to come up with all the places we use our division's logo. And it cost them, I was told, about $5 million to change their logo. They weren't changing the brand name, but they did change the logo. And so it kind of affects, goes in a lot of different places, so you want to get it right. You don't want to set up your brand name and then a year later decide to change it. Anyway, in selecting a brand name, you may want it to suggest certain benefits and qualities. And some examples of that would be like Beauty Rest mattress. That kind of suggests what you would get out of a mattress. You want to get your beauty rest. Or Craftsman tool. If you want to, do woodworking, you want tools that a craftsman would use. Snuggles fabric softener, same thing. You want, Snuggles makes things sound comfortable and scrunchy and that sort of thing. Geek Squad, when you have a problem with your computer, it sounds like those are the people you should call. Now, I'm not necessarily endorsing any of these products, but the names are really good for the type of product they are. Hopefully you also pick a name that is easy to remember, that is easy to pronounce, has what's called good mouthfeel. For instance, I'm not sure how many of you will be familiar with various types of cognac. Two of the major brands are Hennessy's and Courvoisier. Now, Courvoisier, it's French, and if you were to use English phonetics, it would come out something like Corsair. It's and some people actually would go into a bar and didn't want to order it because they didn't know how to pronounce it. Hennessy's very easy to pronounce. It had easier mouthfeel. So in the United States, Hennessy's is a more popular brand, at least the last time I checked. So you want to think about that. You look at brands like Tide, Crest, Puffs, very easy to pronounce, very easy to remember, no problems there. You want a name that will hopefully be distinctive, and this is getting harder and harder because a lot of great names have already been taken. But Lexus, Kodak, Oracle, We, these are very distinctive names. Might be good choices. Can be extended into other categories. Now, this kind of works against the first one, suggesting benefits and qualities. If you use a family name like Heinz, okay, Heinz in itself doesn't suggest anything. It's just a family name. But you saw previously they moved into various, food categories. If you go with the first four selections with the top bullet point, Beauty Rest. Beauty Rest tools? No, Beauty Rest has a limited range of products that brand name will work with. So do you want to extend your brand name into other products? Do you want it to be a family brand? That's just something you need to consider. These are just things to consider. These are not absolute. These are not written in stone. Obviously, there are brands that have violated some of these principles and still have been successful, but you want to consider that. You like a brand that translates across languages. Now, very few words translate across, in fact, no word translates across all languages. However, there are certain words that may be known, a lot of languages borrow, words from each other. Kodak, although it's not the powerhouse it once was, it was a brilliant brand name. Easy to pronounce, very simple. It doesn't mean anything in any language. I will give George Eastman, the founder of the Eastman Kodak Company, credit. Well over 100 years ago, he's thinking about international marketing, and he wants a brand name that will not mean anything or suggest anything else. Kodak is Kodak, similar to Exxon. Some names have not worked well across different languages, like the Chevy Nova. Nova in Spanish means no go, doesn't go. Would you really want to buy a car whose name is doesn't go? Coca-Cola had a similar problem, and this goes to the complexity of Chinese phonetics. Coca-Cola, depending upon the dialect, translates to bite the wax tadpole, or a horse filled with wax. It's kind of a complex thing. So what Coca-Cola did is trying to find a new phonetics, and I'm sure I'm not getting it right. Coca-Cola, which translate, and I know the phonetics are not correct, which translates to happiness in the mouth, which is a much better name than bite the wax tadpole. So you also have to be careful of any unintended associations. For instance, somebody had come up with a toothpaste called Q, which in France is also a pornographic magazine called Q. So you really don't want that association. So you would like a brand name that can move across various language borders without any problems. And so that is something that if you're going to be a global brand, really need to look into very carefully. You want a name that can be registered and protected. Trademarks. You can trademark your brand. I think I spoke about this previously. That you have it if it's a copyright issue, that you have it copyright written. Again, I think I mentioned if my name were McDonald, I can't open up a restaurant called McDonald's, but I can open up a hardware store. So you have to make sure that you are legally free and clear to use that name. Another issue is domain registration considerations. In the early days of the internet, there were no rules. And if you want to have a website, you need a domain name, you need an address. So what they set up, I think it was, I forget the name of the company, but they had sort of a monopoly granted to them by the government to manage that. They've since lost it. It was a temporary thing anyway, but people could just go to that website, go to their website and register, purchase the rights to a URL, the domain address. And somebody went out and registered Coca-Cola.com. But guess what? They didn't work for Coca-Cola. Then Coca-Cola decided they wanted it, but somebody else already had it, and it was perfectly legal. A domain address, a web address, is not the same as a patent or a trademark, or even copyright. And so this guy, and this is called cyber squatting. This is the practice of cyber squatting. So Coca-Cola ended up paying this guy $500,000, and I think it was only like $74 to register it back then. That's a hell of a return on investment. And so every company after that quickly registered all their company names and their trade and all their brand names and that sort of thing. Then somebody tried to register, well, somebody did register ArnoldSchwarzenegger.com. Now, that's and obviously that's a very unique name. Now, it's one thing, for instance, if some people register like more generic names like Delta.com. Well, Delta could be the Delta Airlines, the Delta Dental, other. I think the original company that registered Delta.com was named Delta, but it was a much smaller company, and eventually it got purchased by this other company, by Delta Airlines, because everyone was going there anyway for airline reservation. But anyway, somebody registered ArnoldSchwarzenegger.com, and Arnold was not happy. So he tried to sue them. And in the meantime, there were some laws passed saying if you're registering somebody else's trade name, web address, you have to give it to them for a reasonable amount of money, unless you are actually using it. Now, and so that could be done. So if I registered Delta and I was using it, that's fine. But if I'm just sitting on it, if I'm just cyber squatting, that's no longer allowed. I would have to surrender it unless I was actively using it myself. Excuse me. So actually, if you now go out, what the cyber squatters did is they shifted their strategy. Then they started registering nouns and verbs and compound nouns. Actually, you think about it, Facebook is two nouns slammed together. And I remember I was trying to develop, I was checking out, trying to figure out a brand name for a company. And I thought Image Vortex would be a great name for the company, and they agreed. And then I looked, and somebody had already registered Image Vortex. Again, two nouns slammed together. So it is a little bit of a challenge. And I know a number of people who have come up with a brand name and then and start putting the name on things and then said, oh yeah, we need a website, and they never checked to see if the domain was available. So that's a very important consideration. So again, the whole list here of considerations when you're selecting a brand name. You also have packaging decisions to make. There, of course, is the primary package, and this is the part of the package that actually is in physical contact with your product. It could be a bottle, a tube, a wrapper, like a gum wrapper, whatever it is. This is called the primary package. Now, for things that are, well, bottles maybe, but tubes and wrappers are usually then products that are in those types of packaging were also usually put in a secondary package, which is usually a box, which is often discarded. And if you think about it, it's often for the benefit of the retailer. In fact, a lot of packaging is designed for retail, not simply to, like for instance, a tube of toothpaste is in a box. It'd be very difficult to stack tubes of toothpaste unless they were in boxes. I guess you could put them in a basket, but that is not an efficient way to display product. So, so you have to think in terms of the primary package and then putting it in a secondary package. And secondary packages are great because on a shelf you want, fit various facings. You want it to have something called a shelf shout. A package that's bright. You rarely see gray packaging on a shelf because that's the most boring color. You'll see bright colors, reds and greens and blues and purples and oranges and yellows, and interesting designs. In fact, a lot of packaging periodically gets redesigned. I had worked on a new package design with one company I worked for. I left that company but came back as a consultant, and I think I came back to their sales meeting a year later, and they had completely new packaging. They had changed it that quickly. So, and it's usually the secondary packaging as opposed to the primary packaging. Then there's also shipping cases, packages, cartons, and they'll usually hold identical SKUs. Remember the SKU numbers. So one case will have usually just one, let's say for instance, the 12-ounce of Crest toothpaste. So there'll be one case, that's all it'll have. And then there'll be another case that'll just have the 8-ounce version. Sometimes if you do a customized order, you might have them mixed together, but that's fairly rare. So that's how that works. Labeling and instructions. Many products need to have that. If it's complex, certainly if it's a pharmaceutical product. And also what size and what utility it should be. For instance, let's take a look, think about detergent. Should it be a liquid or a powder? And depending on if it's a liquid or a powder, that will determine the type of packaging and the type of sizes. I often ask my classes, how many different versions in terms of size do you think there are of Tide detergent? And people say, oh, 5, maybe 10. The last time I checked, it was 125. Now, maybe some of them, like maybe some of the versions were lemon scented or something like that. But if you think about detergent, most recently we've had the Tide Pods, which are very small, which are the most expensive per unit of product. They're the most expensive version, but you're buying smaller units. The most efficient buy is to buy the 25-pound bag. I'm sorry, 25-pound box. This would service, and you can imagine, this would service, this product would be for people who do a lot of detergent, large families with, a whole bunch of children, where you're doing a lot of laundry and you want to buy the most cost-effective, package. The lowest in terms of the powdered, I think, was the 1-pound box, which actually was primarily created for college students who were staying in dorms. I remember when I was in college, I was in a fairly small room. When I took my son to college, he was in a really small room, and we were all like, rubbing against each other, just trying to get through. And we brought, actually my son said, looked at half the stuff he had brought and said, asked us to take half home. But we were smart enough to get the 1-pound, although we told him it is the most expensive version. This was before the Tide Pods came out. So you'll have, different sizes, different utilities, maybe liquid. and so forth. So are there special requirements, special considerations for the packaging? A few decades ago, childproofing became very important because there had been some cases of children who gotten a hold of medications or other household products. And so having particularly liquid products, and they try to drink them. So having childproof, very difficult, and you're all familiar with them. You have to press down on them before you turn, something that a little child would probably not be able to do. Also, at the same time, well, I know in the pharmacies will offer special pill bottles that do not have it for some senior citizens who have difficulty getting those open. Tamper-resistant packaging. This became extremely important many years ago after what we call the Tylenol scare. Some people were taking Tylenol and had died, and the cause of death turned out to be cyanide. And these were not suicides. There had been some cyanide residue found in the bottle of the Tylenol. We'll give Johnson & Johnson high marks on how they handle it. They called for an instant recall. They got it all back. They said, don't take any, use our competitors if you must. And they pulled it back. They did a full investigation, and luckily for Johnson & Johnson, the cyanide was, somebody had tried to murder somebody, tried to kill somebody by putting some cyanide in their Tylenol bottle. So this pushed for a movement to have all bottles of things that are consumable, particularly pharmaceuticals and foods, to be vacuum sealed or something in a way that if you open it, somebody could look at and tell that it's been opened previously. Even if like you see the foil covering on the top of the bottle, if there's a hole in it, it means somebody stuck a needle in it. You know that it's no longer safe. And that's become, it's unfortunate that we live in that kind of world. Also, to make packaging counterfeit resistant. And I had sort of a personal experience with this. I worked on a product called Ivomec. It's a pharmaceutical product. It's an injectable product. We started getting reports from California that the product wasn't working. And this was very strange because we had a very good product. It was very effective. We were afraid that maybe there was some sort of natural resistance developing to it. I couldn't imagine that, but so we sent our technical people out, to check all the cases. And one of them picked up a box and said, "Wait a minute, this isn't our box. This looks like our box," but he had a box of the product and he compared it and said, I think this is counterfeit. And they opened up the bottles and they discovered that there was none of our product in the actual bottle. It was saline. If you inject water, the water will kill you if you inject at least too much of it. Saline is what they will give you to hydrate you if you're in the hospital. So there was saline in the bottle. Thank God it was saline, not water. And we tried to track this, and actually turns out that for this particular product, the culprit was actually a terrorist organization, the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, which is no longer particularly active. And they were counterfeiting our product because they wanted to finance their terrorist activities with it. And it was actually very exciting. We were getting death threats, particularly for our people in Ireland and in England. And there were lawsuits. Somebody actually asked me if I would be interested in writing a book about it, sort of a case study. I declined. But my major association with this was that my boss was asked to come up with ways of coming up with packaging that would be counterfeit resistant. And the first go around was to actually take and it would have a special, what they call holographic seal. It's not really holographic, but when you turn it on, it looks different depending on what angle you do it. It's not something that was like, buying seals at the stationery store and putting them on. Within 6 months, the counterfeiters had figured out how to make these, and so then we went to a black light ink type thing, and my boss said basically it was not about finding a solution, but he's always keeping ahead of the competitor, keeping ahead of the counterfeiters. Another special requirement that has in the last few years developed is people like products that are recyclable and what we call green, recyclable packaging. I can remember a time when a lot of things were made out of styrofoam, which is one of those materials that does not recycle very easily. It does not break down. So we're trying to not use styrofoam at all these days. So anyway, these are and actually, if you work in the packaging area, for instance, packaging engineers make a lot of money. So and packaging usually has to be changed for various reasons. And so moving on. Excuse me. Labeling decisions. Obviously, you need to identify the product, and we talked a little bit about having shelf shout, and it should have a strong identity, and it should be distinct. Be careful. I do know of one case, actually somebody I knew worked for a company I worked for. He left the company, and then he decided to make a generic version of our product. And there's nothing illegal about that. It was off patent. But he started making his packaging look very much like ours. And that was, of course, a problem. And the FDA, I'm sorry, not the FDA, the Federal Trade Commission came down on him for that. I thought, good. There are various legal requirements for labeling, depending on what's inside. Ingredients, and we've all occasionally read an ingredients list. Again, there are all sorts of rules that need to be paid attention to that. Instructions on how to use the product. Hazard warnings and safety instructions. What if, you swallow it? What if how should you use it? How should you not use it? Unit pricing by standard measure. This is mostly for food products, particularly with products that were not necessarily sold in uniform units. For instance, I remember buying cheese, and they had basically gotten big, I guess, rings of cheese and chopped it up into smaller bits, but they didn't chop it perfectly. It was sliced up in the store, and they had to price it by unit, by pound, or by ounce. So somebody isn't getting a better deal or worse deal than somebody else. Opening dates, open buy dates, or expiration dates. Many products are perishable, so we need to pay attention to the dating of that. Most companies will be very conservative with their dating. They don't want to be accused of of making a product that is bad. If a product says that it expires on June 15th, chances are you can drink it or eat it on the 16th and the 17th. Actually, when film was very popular, I knew I could use film 6 months after it had had the expiration date. In fact, actually, there's a store out there that will buy from other stores expired products at a discount, obviously, and then they resell it. These are out for people who are very price sensitive. Because you can, but you do have to put your open buy date and your expiration date. Any nutritional information, and also be careful of the use of health-related terms. Things like heart healthy. What does that actually mean? There is no definition. Light, healthy. These, like for instance, if I were to ask you, is a cheeseburger healthy for you? Most of you would probably say no. However, if somebody's starving, a cheeseburger is very healthy. It depends upon the situation. So there are various regulations, and the regulations change about health-related terms. Anyway, we can have various brand development strategies. Here we have another grid. Sorry about that. So here on the horizontal, we're talking about product categories, existing products, or a new product category, a brand name, an existing brand name, or a new brand name. If you are adding new products, developing new products, and it's using an existing brand name in an existing product category, sort of like Heinz, with its sauces. These various differences or variations are called line extensions. The most obvious one would be like Coca-Cola. There's regular Coke, then there's Diet Coke, Cherry Coke, Lemon Coke, Lime Coke, Potpourri Coke. There's a whole bunch of other line extensions. So it's essentially the same product with a little variation. And you see this in the automotive industry too, and creating just variations. And you're essentially selling to the same type of person who just might have slightly different preferences. If you are using new brand names, but selling essentially the same kind of product, this is called multi-branding or multi-brands. A great example of this is one that I actually spoke to somebody about. I am sure that most of you at one time or another have drunk Kool-Aid, probably when you were a child. I suspect, however, most of you do not drink Kool-Aid now, or very few of you anyway. Nothing wrong with drinking Kool-Aid, I'm not putting it down. But Kraft, the company that owns Kool-Aid, saw this. They understood that it was very popular with children, but it's like by the time most people got their driver's license, they didn't want to drink Kool-Aid anymore. If I were to do a poll of you in the class, asked who drinks Kool-Aid, very few of you would say yes. What the people at Kraft wanted to do is they wanted to get adults to drink it. And they did some market research, and it confirmed that adults were generally not going to drink Kool-Aid in any large quantities. However, there was an interesting piece of information. Adults would drink instant lemonade, which that's essentially what lemon Kool-Aid is. It's instant lemonade. So what Kraft decided to do was to create a new brand. It was called, and some of you might be familiar with this, Country Time Lemonade. Essentially, it's a lemon powder put into water, mixed up, instant lemonade. And actually, I remember the campaign, and I spoke to the account manager at the ad agency that worked on the launch of Country Time. And the launch campaign was sort of a slice of life thing. It was Timmy, a grandson. All Timmys on TV shows are named all grandsons are named Timmy for some reason. Timmy comes to visit Grandma and Grandpa in the country. They have an old sort of Victorian house, very nice, and Timmy gets along with Grandpa really well, and Grandpa would tell stories to Timmy about when he met Grandma, or maybe Grandpa would get a new dog or something like that. But they'd always talk about, we always had time for lemonade. That was a big thing. And of course, so Country Time Lemonade got into that story, and it was a way of letting everyone know about it. And it was a very successful campaign. And when I spoke to this guy at the agency, he said, basically, we just had to figure out what were Timmy and Grandpa going to do next. Get the dog. Grandpa's going to volunteer at the local fire department, but he's going to be in charge of the horse-drawn pumper truck. It was just silly stuff. But the campaign was very successful. And this gentleman was actually so successful, this gentleman decided to go on vacation. And he was packing the night before, and he gets a call from a colleague at the agency. He says, turn on the TV. He goes, what am I looking for? You'll see it. It's all over every station. And it was a Minute Maid ad for instant lemonade. And it was very simple. It was a guy in a suit, in white background, very simple. And it had 3 offerings. And the person said, well, would you like instant lemonade with 15 lemons, the juice of 15 lemons, the juice of 2 lemons, or the juice of no lemons? Nobody can remember which had 2 and which had 15, but everyone could remember which had 0. Guess which? Country Time lemonade. Now, what it was is it wasn't chemicals. It was actually made from the rinds, the zest, the lemon zest, the solid part of the lemon. Minute Maid knew this because Minute Maid was a manufacturer of frozen lemonade concentrate, and so they would take the lemon juice and use it to make their concentrate, and they would sell the scrap to Kraft, who would use it to make Country Time lemonade as well as lemon Kool-Aid. And they said, well, maybe we should get, we should explain this, have Timmy and Grandpa go into the lemon grove, and they said no. So they decided to sort of give up the ghost on that. They still sell it, but they're not going to promote it. It sort of moved down to the cash cow area. But they said, this worked once, let's do it again. So they decided this time to relaunch it under the name of Crystal Light, and they targeted young women who like to work out. They got an actress named Linda Evans to be the spokesperson. Linda Evans was a very popular actress. She played a character called Crystal, that's the tie-in, on a very popular television show called Dynasty. So she was very well known at the time. And so she would be in a workout outfit and talk about how she likes Crystal Light. Now, here's the point. It's lemon powder. Kool-Aid, the lemon Kool-Aid, the Country Time lemonade, and the Crystal Light, it's all the same product. It's just under 3 different brand names, each targeting different groups of consumers. Kool-Aid is going after kids. Country Time lemonade is a little bit broader, going towards adults. Crystal Light is going towards young women who are more athletic. Those are the positions of those brands. So, and you'll see this actually in other brands where it's actually the same product but packaged differently with a different name, going after a different target market. Okay. We can also, if we're going into new product categories with an existing brand name, this can be called a brand extension, such as when Heinz I don't know which came first, the baked beans or the ketchup. I think the baked beans came first. But essentially, they extended their brand into another product category. So it can be somewhat problematic if you try to extend into too many different product categories. Again, Heinz was a family name that made it a little bit easier to do. But you do have to be careful about that. One successful brand extension that sort of caught me off guard was Mr. Clean. Mr. Clean, of course, is the floor detergent. They actually took that brand and I think about 10 years ago, roughly, applied it to car washes. Mr. Clean Car Wash. The guy in the white undershirt and the earring, bald, older. So that kind of worked. I don't know how well the car washes have done, but it kind of tied in with the image of clean. So sometimes it doesn't necessarily work out so well. We'll talk more about that later. New brands. This is a diversification strategy. Basically, we're creating new brand names. We're moving into new product categories. Procter & Gamble does this all the time. So they go into new product categories as they as they emerge, and we'll create new brand names for those products. So, okay. One note here, particularly when we get to an exam, make sure you distinguish between a line extension and a brand extension. The difference is the product category. A line extension, you're staying in the same product category with the same name. A brand extension is where you're taking that brand name and extending it into a different product category, like, Mr. Clean floor cleaner, moving it to Mr. Clean car washes. So it's important to make that distinction, and I guarantee you there'll be a question on this, and I don't want you to get it wrong on the exam. Okay. Every product has a life cycle, just like us human beings. We're born, we're conceived, we're gestated, we're born, we grow, we mature, and eventually we decline. And the same thing with products. For the product life cycle, we have distinct stages: product development, introduction or launch, growth, maturity, and then eventual decline. So we launch, and we go up and then we go down. And this second blue line is for our profit and loss. Obviously, during development, we're not making any sales. We don't make any sales until launch, until we start selling. So product development is an investment, and some people might categorize it as an expense, but either way, you're putting money into the product, and even after launch, you see the profits or the losses are increasing, going down. That's because you're investing in launch activities, advertising, distribution expansion, that sort of thing. And eventually it starts to come up. Now, these curves are not necessarily proportional. They'll be different for every product. So just be aware of that. So we've launched, and sometime during the growth phase, I assume that we will break even and get into profitability. The maturity phase is probably the most flexible, the most elastic. Some products have very short maturity phases. Others have very long ones. Some might be a few months. Which is very unusual. Others might be 100 years. You look at Coca-Cola; it's been around for well over 100 years. Now, are they still in the maturity phase, or are they in the decline phase? That can be argued, but certainly they have had a very long maturity phase. During introduction, we have very low sales. We're just starting out. There's probably very low brand awareness, very high cost per customer. We're investing in distribution and advertising and other forms of promotion and production. So we're going to have negative profits, as we saw from the curve. Our initial customers are going to be the innovators, the people who just want to try it because it's new. At this point, our marketing objective is going to create trial awareness, and I'm trying to create product awareness and create product trial. Our strategy is usually to offer a basic product. If you have products that are too complex or too many different line extensions, too many different versions of the product, that may overwhelm people. So you want to offer a basic product, particularly if it's a new type of product. You will probably build selective distribution. If you think about this, if you're trying to get into stores, let's say retail, you're competing with every product in that store for shelf space, even if they're not your direct competitor, even if they're nowhere near your product category. A store only has so much shelf space. What can you offer to get on that shelf? Well, obviously there's certain bonuses you can offer in terms of maybe money or free product or whatever, but also you might be able to offer, I won't say exclusive distribution, but very selective distribution. You could say, hey, in this county, you will be the only one offering this product. In fact, we're going to put your address on our website to drive people here to your store. That might be an incentive that a retailer would have to. In addition, you may not have the resources to get into every retailer. You want to build product awareness among those early adopters. Remember, those early adopters are also opinion leaders. So you want to reach those people, and you want to do lots of sales promotion to stimulate trial. And you've seen, in stores they do tastings and giveaways and that sort of thing, discounts, and that sort of thing. Excuse me. Next is the growth phase. We love the growth phase. We're getting rising sales. Yay. Declining cost per customer. Okay, that makes us a little bit more profitable, and so our profits are going to rise. Now we have the early adopters, and so, as well as the innovators. Our marketing objectives are to maximize market share. We're now growing. We're probably taking some sales away from some of our competitors. Our strategies might include offering product extensions, like line extensions, different flavors, different sizes, whatever it is. And we're working towards building more intensive distribution. We want to now have more people distribute. Still trying to build product awareness to the broader market. We never want to stop doing that. And we'll probably want to reduce our sales promotions to take advantage of the heavier demand. And this, of course, will increase our margins. So there's lots of reasons to love the growth phase. Lots of fun there. Eventually, we get to the maturity phase. We have peak sales. We're not really going to get sales much higher. Doesn't mean we can't, but we may have well, I'll get back to that. So we're going to have a lower cost per customer. Now we're very successful. We're going to have high profits. We now have the early and late majorities. Our objective is to maximize profits while defending market share, because now others are coming after us. We may want to diversify our brand and models, creating further line extensions, maybe even brand extensions. Build even more intensive distribution. I think I spoke previously about Coca-Cola trying to be everywhere, market penetration. They're trying to be in every vending machine and put a vending machine or a refrigerator in every store. And there was some people at Coca-Cola who just years ago just looking for blank walls. Hey, there's a blank wall. I can put a vending machine there. Obviously, you want to stress product differences. As I start to say, it's very difficult to grow in the mature phase if you have market saturation. A great example of market saturation would be shaving cream. Most people are actually shaving less. If you notice, I have a beard, and a lot of men have grown beards. And that's kind of difficult if you're in the shaving cream business. You have competitors you have indirect competitor would be electric shavers. How could you grow that market? The only way I could think of is to convince the people who shave to shave twice a day. I don't think that's really going to happen. So the only way you can really grow, and you can grow organically in that as the population grows, you can still grow with the population, but to get a greater market share is going to be very difficult. So that's why you need to stress product differences. Use sales promotions to encourage brand switching. For instance, years ago, I worked in production, and I went with the boss of the studio, and we had to do something with required a firearm. So there's a place in Manhattan, I don't know if it's still open, where they rent firearms. Now, these are not active firearms. They don't have firing pins. They cannot be used to fire a bullet. They are simply for, uh, you know, for people to hold. It's a prop house for firearms. Anyway, so I think this guy got an Uzi machine gun, wrapped it in brown paper, but so it just looked like a package. And this guy I was working for was a little bit of a cheapskate. He anyway, it's around lunchtime, and at the time, Burger King had started this thing where obviously they accepted their own coupons, but they started saying they would accept other people's coupons. They would accept something from McDonald's for a similar product. So if you had a coupon from McDonald's for a Big Mac, they would accept it and give you a Whopper. And in fact, they even said they would accept, within reason, they had some limits on that. If you made up your own coupon, with a pen and paper. It was kind of silly, but what they were trying to do was encourage brand switching. And Dan was the guy who I was working for. He said, "Oh, it's lunchtime. We'll go to Burger King, but we need a coupon, and we have to make one up." And we didn't have paper on us. And I said, "Oh, well, there's a bank there. We can use the back of a deposit slip." And he starts to proceed to walk into this bank with this Uzi. It was wrapped in paper, but under his arm. I had to pull him back. I said, "Dan, I'll get the paper. You stay out here with the Uzi." Walking into a bank with a machine gun or submachine gun is generally not a smart thing to do. But the point of the story, as amusing as it might be, or odd as it might be, is that there's intense brand switching in the mature areas of products. You can't grow organically. The market is not going to grow, so you need to increase to take. Instead of making the pie bigger, you need to get a bigger slice of the pie, and that's what you do when you're in the mature phase. Well, all good things must come to an end, or at least a decline. Now, decline doesn't necessarily mean death, but this is something. And actually, if you get a job, your first job as a product manager will probably be for a product that is starting to decline, or it's in that it's past it. They're not going to give you the star or the cash cow first time out. They'll probably give you I don't say a dog, but it's a product that is declining. Obviously, it has declining sales. There's lower cost per customer because everyone knows knows the brand. However, since there's lower sales, there are also declining profits. And by now, we have picked up the laggards. Hopefully, we have more than the laggards, but we finally picked them up. So essentially, what we want to do is reduce expenditures and milk the brand. I mean, here our cash cows have moved over to dogs. So we've got to milk this brand. So what we might do is phase out the weaker offerings. Again, we might have many line extensions. And I remember for one product I worked on, one brand I worked on, we were in the mature phase, headed towards decline, and somebody said, "I think there's one of our offerings, one of our line extensions we should phase out." And it was, excuse me, it was actually quite popular, but it was a later offering, and it was actually the most expensive version to manufacture. We got more for it, but our profits were not the strongest on this particular offering. So as a result, we discontinued that particular offering. Cutting price, certainly. And we might also phase out unprofitable outlets. Managing distribution takes up time and money. So maybe we want to narrow our distribution a little bit, return to selective distribution for those people who still want us. We would reduce our advertising just enough to maintain our loyal customers. In fact, in many cases, you might not do any advertising at all. You reduce your sales promotions to an absolute minimum. Um, so, um, as I said, this is moving cash cows to dogs. However, you can keep a declining product going for a long time. Uh, I remember there was a discussion about, we were phasing out one product. It was called Nicarb. You would not be familiar with it. It's actually a medication used for chickens. It treats something called coccidiosis. It comes in bags of pellets. And so it had been decided that we were going to get rid of, discontinue Nicarb. And then somebody discovered somewhere an entire warehouse filled with Nicarb. So we decided, okay, we have to get rid of this. And one sales rep said, hey, I can sell it. That's still a good product. And he had faith in the product for some reason. And he decided that he was going to take on this challenge of selling this product that had been declining. And why he did this, I don't know. Maybe he felt a personal challenge, or he liked the product, or he knew the customers who would respond to it. And he did a hell of a job. And it made management reconsider, saying, wait a minute, if he can do this and it's just him, what if we put a little bit more behind it? And he actually saved the brand. They were ready to give it the chop, and he, this last ditch effort, and did a wonderful job. So, we'll see this now. We have lots of products that will go through this this life cycle. Some will go through it very slowly. Some will go through it very quickly. The ones that go through it very quickly, we tend to call fads. They're a fad. You've heard the term fad. If you try to think of certain products that were a fad, one of my favorites is it actually occurred in the 1970s. It was called the Pet Rock. My cousin had one. It was launched in October of I think it was 1973. That holiday season, it was very popular. People running out to get their pet rocks. It was just a round, smooth rock in a cardboard box. I love the fact that they actually put holes in the box. The most expensive part of the product was actually printing up the instruction manual, the care and feeding of a pet rock. My cousin took this pet rock everywhere. And I know it's completely stupid, but it was obviously a gimmick. And you probably are familiar with other products that were fads. They were very popular, intensely popular for a very short amount of time. The fidget spinner, years ago, there's the Tamagotchi. You might think of some other ones. But you can't sustain a business on this because it's by definition, a fad is a short-term proposition. So something to think about. Okay, I think that's all I have for you today. Obviously, read the textbook. Please do the activities in Canvas, and I will. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me either by email or, by email would be best. All right, take care.